Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight, we are going to be diving into the world of cryptids. But fear not, for we have not come alone. I have the pleasure of welcoming back the paranormal scholar in tonight's video. This is a two-part collaboration, which has even more spooky tales of cryptids ready and waiting for you on their channel when you're done here. So be sure to follow me over when this video ends to check it out. You are in for some seriously good stories tonight. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. It's been a couple of months since this happened. I live in a quiet village in the south of Germany. Next to our village is a rather large forest, with loads of hiking and biking tracks leading through it. When I was little, either my aunt or my dad took me there for walks, almost every second day. It became a habit for me to keep on going for walks throughout the forest later on in life, but that changed a couple of months ago. I usually went on walks with music on during the daytime, but one night, during the full moon and a clear sky, I felt a little brave and bored at the same time, and decided to go for a stroll. I grabbed a flashlight just in case, and my phone before I headed out. Halfway through my usual route, I was feeling happy and enjoyed my music, until I came across a little bridge that led to the forest. One of my songs faded out, but before the next one could play, I heard the most blood-curdling scream I'd ever heard in my entire life. I took off my headphones, thinking that maybe a boar or another forest critter stepped into a trap, since that happens from time to time here. But once I took a step closer half over the bridge, I heard it again. This time, closer. I turned on my flashlight and saw among the trees next to the entry path a snow-white, skinny as hell, pitched black-eyed face staring straight at me. I've never felt this horrified in my entire life. My insides told me that if I were to take another step, I'd be dead. I didn't care for what was to happen, as I turned around and ran in the other direction, and went straight home, with a constant feeling of dread in my neck. Ever since then, whenever I'm home alone, I feel watched and uneasy. On several occasions, I've even heard footsteps outside on our porch, and garden chairs pushed around. I have no clue what I've seen, or what to do about it. Any explanation on what the hell that thing that was hunting me was, will certainly be appreciated. Halloween night of 2014. I was coming home from a party at about midnight-ish to my parents' house. The house sits back about 15 to 20 feet from the road where I had to park. Parents are out cold by the time I got there, so the house is completely dark. As I lock up the car and start making my way towards the front door and very open yard, with few bushes and one large evergreen tree on the left side between the neighbouring yard, I notice a tall, 7 to 8 foot, white/blue, hazy figure, standing behind the trunk of the evergreen. It appeared to be almost peering out from behind it, somewhat human in form and featureless, except with the exception of its very long arms, legs, and fingers. Thinking it's the neighbour's Halloween deco, I pause for a moment to study it, when I notice its head cock from one side very rapidly, as if it were studying me. Stunned, I freeze, keys in hand, as I'm watching this thing take 3 large strides and run behind the house, which is about 10 feet from the tree. The way it moved is what gets to me. It was like someone pulling back a rubber band and snapping it into hyperspace. Mind blown. No trace of it after that, though I felt watched and fearful of any windows in the house for the rest of the night. I'll preface this by saying my approach to paranormal things in life is to be open-minded until proven otherwise. So for full disclosure, I do believe in almost everything paranormal, but I've never actually seen anything worth noting myself, other than when maybe we saw a Bigfoot in Oregon back in 2012. But I was pretty far away, and it could have just been a distant bear or even a tree. Anyway, I am a single dad. My son was born in 2010. I like to think of myself as a very dedicated father. He is by far and always the best thing in my life ever, and as such, where he's involved, my memories are usually clear and more profound. Since the first time he ever slept in a bed with me, I can recall odd things happening during sleep, and it's every time that he sleeps in bed with me. Noises, blurry visions, and I wake up from such noises. A window or a door open that I knew was closed, a nightlight unplugged and on the floor, stuff like that. Well, yesterday, he was sick, and I let him sleep with me in my bed last night. I recently switched to overnight shifts at work, so when I'm off now, I've become a very light sleeper during normal sleep hours. The last thing I remember before dozing off was that my son had kicked off his blankets. He prefers to sleep that way, and I think this detail may be important, and that his pillow had kind of shifted towards the headboard, and his head wasn't on the pillow at all. This morning, a little before 4, I awoke to a noise, only this time I actually saw something. As I sat up, I noticed my bedroom door is open, and I never leave it open. As I'm noticing this, my focus becomes clearer, and I swear that along the door frame I can see 4 very long fingers. Not claws, fingers. As I moved to get out of bed, the hand moved away, and I see what I can only describe as a fleeing tail. As soon as I get to my door and look into the next room, there is nothing. I searched everywhere, nothing still. All doors were locked, as were the windows. When I go back to check on my son, the pillow is back perfectly under his head. The blankets were pulled up onto him, and the fever he had broken. He was sleeping peacefully. I have never, including this morning, felt threatened by what I have seen or heard. In contrast, I've probably felt more at ease than I should have in this situation. A couple of notes. I've always had, and still do have, dogs who sleep in the room with me. They never even barked or growled. I do have a history of sleep paralysis, though I can always tell when it's been an episode, just by how terrifying they are. I don't think this is what the situation was. And finally, I don't drink at all, and if I ever do anything, it's maybe smoke a joint when I go camping with my high school buddies. The question is, should I be concerned? Are there such things as sweet cryptids that watch over your children? Does this sound like something any of you have heard? Or is this some sort of subconscious thing I'm experiencing? Any information would be valued. So this happened about 2 years ago now. I was biking on the Panhandle Trail, and this specific instance was just across the Pennsylvania-West Virginia border, on the West Virginia side. I had been biking since morning and stopped for water. I had just crossed the border, and after a few more miles decided to turn back. As I was riding, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something off, so I stopped to look. About 40 yards off the trail, up fairly high on a tree, there was this thing. The only way I can describe it is that it looked like a 4 or 5 foot tall owl, but still a bit off from that. Slightly more humanoid actually, which is what made me think to tell you guys about it. It was sitting in this tree facing me, kind of bobbing its head up and down, almost as if it was sizing me up. Perhaps that's just my mind getting to me more. I'd thought that it's probably just a tarp or trash bag or something stuck in the tree, but the branch it was on was very thick. I'd say at least 6 to 7 inches in diameter, and the branch was swaying along with these head bobs. It was very dark in colour. The only thing I could really make out, for more than a silhouette, was the face was darker, black, than the brown-grey that made up the rest of it. It didn't freak me out too much, because I assumed it was totally something explainable, but it certainly unsettled me enough to get me on a fast pace back home, especially as the area of the trail that I was on was very remote as far as I could tell. Like I said, I'm sure this could be explained away somehow. I don't really believe in these sort of things at all, but man, that experience has stuck with me. And that being said, not that you guys have any reason to believe some dude on the internet, this is 100% true, and I tried to give all the details I could. I hope you find it as cool as I have for the last few years. I love freaking people out with this story. There is a place in the country that I live in. I believe it might be called Bumbleguini. I'm not sure, but it is a legit place. It's small, and nothing lives there. There's a body of water but not one fish in it. No birds, no animals, nothing. It might be some old radiation thing, but who really knows the background of this place? Anyway, the town drunk used to go fishing nearby this place. Obviously not at it, because there would be no fish. And he came back to town with a story that when I heard it made my spine shiver. A lot of people dismissed what he said, because I guess he wasn't that intelligent, and he was a drunk. But he swore he was perched up on the river fishing at night, and saw a few meters down from him a pig-like figure on all fours splash into the water and swim across to the other side. He said he didn't really look like a pig, but that's the closest he could describe it to. And then when it got to the other side, it climbed out on 2 legs and walked out with the shape of a human. He swears it to be true, and I don't know. Who am I to say he's lying? Paranormal stories like this get told all the time. I've worked the night shift for a long time. One of the scariest experiences I had was when I worked at an abandoned factory. Now, apparently, the owners of the factory were waiting for some permissions to tear it down and build something new on the land, but in the meantime, it had to be protected. The job itself was simple enough, and not very creepy, as we hardly ever had to go into the building. We simply had to patrol the perimeter and ensure that no doors had been opened and that no one was about. Now, something that was always a bit of an inconvenience was the fact that the toilet was about a 5-minute walk from my station. But I am a guy, and the station bordered woods that extended for miles. So, oftentimes, assuming all I needed to do was a whiz, I'd just go and do my business in the woods. It's not like anyone was around to see what I was doing. Anyway, on to the story. It was your typical night, and I believe it was sometime around 4 a.m. I was just scrolling through Reddit on my phone, seeing if I can read anything interesting, perhaps immerse myself in a spooky story, when nature's call urged me to get up, and I approached the tree line, a way I had done hundreds of times. I always carry my flashlight, but the light from the small hut was enough so that I could just walk out into the darkness and do my business quickly and privately. However, upon reaching the tree line did I hear something. Now it isn't the first time I've heard something. Most of the times it's just an animal moving around in the brush, so I ignored it as I did my business. As I'm just zipping myself up and turning around to leave, do I notice something in the tree line? Eyes. At least, I think it's eyes. I hear twigs cracking from underneath the weight of whatever this thing is, and I stare at it blankly for a moment. I whip out my flashlight and shine it directly at this thing. I don't even know what it was, but it was about 8 feet tall, brown fur, standing on 2 legs, and it was just watching me. The moment the flashlight hit it though, it covered its eyes and ran back into the tree line. I noped out of there and back into my station, locked the door, and occasionally would peep out the window to make sure it wasn't looking at me, after of course switching off all the lights. I waited in the dark listening, and didn't do any more of my rounds until daylight. I quit after that. No way did I want to encounter that thing again. I was there for a while, so I feel myself lucky to not have encountered it sooner.
I don't even know how to explain this, but I'm not the sort to believe in ghosts, devils, demons, and cryptids. But this has changed my mind drastically. I live in the countryside of the United Kingdom on a moderately busy lane and have loads of fields behind my house. Roughly 5 minutes up the road there's a hill called Coal Peak. It's about 6 fields away from my house and a 5-minute walk from the road. Me and my 2 friends would often go to the peak that overlooks our town and have a view over the Severn Bridge and a place called Stone House. They smoke weed, but I don't, so I can't blame what I saw on that. We sat up the top for a good hour, chilling and hanging out, but it was approaching 2 a.m, so we decided to call it a night. They walk the roadway down as it leads to the town where they live, but I, however, opted to walk through the fields, as I don't want to walk down the road on my own after my friends turn off. To get to the fields, you have to walk through a little forest for around 2 minutes. It was very dark that night, save for the moon and stars shining overhead. Just as I was around 2/3 through the forest, I heard sticks cracking to my left, as if something heavy was walking upon them. I glance over, presuming it was a fox or badger. I get towards the gate and open it, as it leads into the fields that lead to my house. I close the gate and start to walk, and that's when I heard something that I will never forget. It sounded like a Minecraft creeper, but a lot bigger and deeper sounding. I turn around and on the path I can see this thing, around 6 foot tall and very skinny, with the face of a dog and horns. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, so I just stood there watching it, hoping it was just going to vanish. Well, to my surprise, after about 5 seconds, it started to very slowly walk closer, closer, and closer until it got to the gate. It was like I didn't know what to do, except just stand there. I was sweating, had red vision and thought I was going to have an anxiety attack. I slowly walked across the field, trying to figure out what it would be. I looked back, about halfway across the field, and it was gone. I remember breathing a sigh of relief and calmed down enough to take a nice walk home. At least that's what I was hoping for. I was in the last field from my house, with my house in view, and I knew all I had to do was jump over my fence and I was in my garden. I got to my fence and hopped over. I felt safe and secure and was walking across my garden to get to the back door when, all of a sudden, my drive light came on. Now this light only comes on if it detects motion or if it's really windy and a branch sways in front of it. It wasn't windy, nor did I walk past it. All of a sudden I had this fear of getting snatched, so I quickly run over to my back door, open it, and run to my attic converted room. My skylight window looks over my drive where the light came on, and I stood on my bed and looked out the window, and that's when I saw it again. I once again see this horned creature sniffing around the cars. It wasn't a dog. It wasn't small enough to be a badger or a fox, and it wasn't a cow or anything like that. I just got into bed and watched movies until the sun came up and slept then. Ever since then, I never look out my window at night and never walk through those fields. I honestly don't know what this thing was, but it scared the hell out of me, and I won't go into my garden past 11 p.m. anymore.
4 or 5 years ago, my friend and I decided to take her dog on a walk in the bush behind her house. We knew the area quite well. There was a creek which we crossed and explored into a new area, up a hill and down a few old biking trails. The scenery changed quite suddenly. From the old spruce and pines came new growth of white poplar. It was quite eerie. Looking back on it though, although we didn't share it, it was obvious we were both extremely uneasy. It felt like there were eyes on us, which wouldn't be too strange as we were in a forest. There are tons of animals around. We didn't think much of it when her dog started going nuts, barking and growling. We thought it was just a squirrel, but we realized that that wasn't the case when we turned around. At the end of the trail, perhaps 90 feet away, was some lanky, tall, grey, skinned thing. I don't remember the face. All I know is that it was not an animal I had ever seen before. I know we ran, and I can't remember if it chased us. I don't know when we stopped either. It wasn't following us anymore if it had chased us. We made it home okay, and never spoke of it really after that. I never forgot, and started to believe I had just dreamt it, or made it up in my head. I asked my friend, and she remembered the exact same thing as me minus the face. This happened on the outskirts of Prince George, British Columbia, in the fall. Does anyone else have any information about a crawler in that area? This happened to me on the 27th of October this year. For some context, I'm a 19-year-old male who is currently working in Finnish military, as it is mandatory for everyone over 18 years old. In late October, our company had a shooting camp. Pretty average stuff. We go to a shooting area, train for a week doing different kinds of shooting exercises, and then return to the brigade. This one was no different. Except during this particular camp, we put few guardsmen to some major roads leading to the area to make sure no unauthorized people would enter the dangerous area. This guardsman job was actually a real blast, since if you were chosen to do it, you were put to a booth that had heating, a bunk, electricity, a fridge, and all other sorts of luxuries that other troops could only dream of while laying in their tents. Well, on Friday evening of the 27th, I almost couldn't contain my joy when I heard that I would be the one getting the last guardsman's shift on the guard booth. I would guard the place from the moment I arrived there until the next morning, when someone would come and pick me up and we would leave. I got one battle buddy with me to do the booth, so we could do shifts, allowing the other to sleep while the other guards. We arrive at the booth. It's late evening already. So me and my buddy just lay down our gear, heat up the booth and decide on our shifts. My buddy was to guard from 7 till 11, and I would continue to do it from 11 to 3, and then we would switch again and so on. I could have gone to sleep immediately, but I decided to keep my buddy company since I didn't feel tired. We ended up chatting the whole 4 hours about life and stuff. You know, the usual thing young guys talk about. The time basically flew while we chatted, and no cars passed through the booth during the whole time. Finally, my buddy's shift ended, and my shift started. He said he was tired and went to sleep immediately, so I took my place as guardsman and continued alone. At this point, it would be wise to tell you a little bit about the place we were in. The shooting area itself was dozens of kilometers in diameter, and pretty secluded, so no civilians usually bothered to come, even if it were by accident. The booth itself was located about 5 kilometers from our campsite, so me and my buddy were pretty much isolated from everyone and everything. The only form of communication we had was a radio that we could use to contact the security major if something were to happen. The place we had to guard was an X-shaped junction, one road going from north to south, and the other from west to east. Everything south of the booth was off limits to everyone who didn't have direct acceptance from the security major to enter, since it was dangerous because of the shootings and explosions that we practiced there. Now, back to my shift. The 4 hours I had to sit there in complete silence felt much longer than the 4 hours I had chatted with my friend, obviously. But I didn't complain. I actually quite enjoyed it. Looking at the snow-covered roads and forests lit dimly by one single street lamp and the crescent moon from the cloudless sky, it was literally a perfect night for ghosts and monsters. There was no wind, no sound at all, and no cars passing during my whole shift. I loved it. I've always liked being alone, and loved silence. On top of that, I also liked everything creepy, so I kept myself entertained imagining all kinds of scary beings lurking in the forest beyond the reach of the streetlight. Not that I believed any of it though. But I had to admit that each time I stepped out of the booth, I got this feeling of being watched. You know, the one that makes your neck tingle and the hairs stand up on the back of your neck. I didn't mind it though. It was normal. I was a guardsman in the middle of nowhere, basically alone in the middle of the night. It was normal to be a little paranoid. Though, there would be nothing to fear in the forest. I've lived my whole life near them, and know really well what lies within them, and what does not. That's how I kept my imagination from running too wild. Hours passed, and my shift was nearing its end. I looked at my phone, and decided that soon would be time to wake up my buddy. But before doing that, I would go out and take a whiz. I didn't want to go to sleep and then wake up minutes later with the urge to pee, so that's what I did. I stepped out, walked behind the booth, and started doing what I came to do. All was peaceful, and I had already started to plan what I was going to do on my next vacation, when I happened to lift my gaze from the ground and took a quick glance from my surroundings. As soon as I looked to my left, directly to the south of the booth, my heart skipped a beat, and my stomach grew cold. Just a mere 20 to 30 meters away from me, in the forest, just barely lit by the streetlight, something was standing. It clearly looked human, but the sheer size of the thing assured me that it was not. The thing had to be at least 3 meters tall. It wasn't in any way strangely shaped. It looked perfectly human, but it was just huge. By the looks of it, it was wearing a long green robe-like clothing, like Sniper's ghillie suit. Its face was pale, but I could not make out any facial features. It was too far away for that, but I could tell that it was staring straight at me, and I was standing absolutely still. I didn't move a muscle, nor did I make the slightest sound. That, in particular, gives me the creeps for some reason. One curious detail that I also noticed was that it was crossing its arms over its chest, so that its hands were clutching its shoulders. That's the best way I can describe what I saw. And usually when I tell people this story, they dismiss it, and I tell them what I saw, and then I show them the evidence. I took a photo of the creature I saw. I may have been scared out of my mind, but I was still a guardsman, and my duty was to document everything that happened. After I had recovered from my initial shock of seeing this thing, I just continued staring at it, while silently I finished taking a whiz. I looked at the creature the whole time I pulled my pants up, closed them, and thought of what I would do next. The obvious answer was to pull out my rifle and confront it, but my careless self had decided to leave it in the booth, together with my battle knife and axe. I was without a weapon, face to face against this towering behemoth of a humanoid. I weighed my options and decided to get the hell out of there, but not before I took that picture. After I had done that, I slowly turned around and walked to the booth. I sat in my chair, grabbed the axe, and waited. Now you may ask why I didn't grab the assault rifle. The answer is because this isn't the USA. This is Finland, and even though we are in a military shooting camp, carrying ammo with you is prohibited, even for a guardsman. That's because here average citizens can't just carry a loaded gun with them wherever they please. So having ammo with us, when the risk of running into a hostile armed person is really minimal, would just be another safety risk. Usually just the sight of a gun, let alone assault rifle, is enough to scare violent people into calming down. But what I had seen was no human. It couldn't have been. So now I just sit in my booth holding my axe, ready to defend myself if the creature came. But it never did. The last couple of dozen minutes of my shift went absolutely silent. When my shift ended, I immediately woke up my buddy and told him what I'd seen. But apparently he was 2 days after he'd just woken up, that he really did not register what I had just told him. I, however, didn't care. The only thing I cared for was that I wouldn't set foot outside that booth again that night, and it was my turn to rest. So I laid down, heart still pounding from the stress, and tried to fall asleep. Needless to say, it was pretty difficult after what I had seen, but eventually I fell asleep, since it was quiet and peaceful again. Though my sleep didn't last long, I woke up before my next shift had even started, to the sound of footsteps coming from the outside of the booth. I thought that it must just be my friend carrying firewood from the outside, until I realized that he had fallen asleep in the front of the guard desk. There was someone, or something, outside the booth that didn't belong there. Someone that I feared I had seen earlier. I just laid there, heart pounding. I was not going to stand to see what was on the outside. This went on for a minute, until I heard a sudden howl. At first it sounded like the wind blowing through the cracks on the wall, but then I remembered there was no wind. This howl was long and high-pitched, almost like a moan. It made my whole body freeze from terror. I had never been this scared in my life. After the howl ended, the footsteps continued for a while, until they faded too. Whatever had been on the outside was now finally gone. Hopefully. Against all odds, I managed to fall back asleep and was awoken up in the morning by my friend, whose next shift had started. I immediately remembered what happened the last night and told my friend. At first he didn't believe me but laughed a little, but his expression grew serious once I showed him the picture I took. When we went outside and I showed him the place where I had taken the photo, he was quiet. While we stood there, I took a second photo for comparison. My friend then walked to the spot where the creature had stood when I saw it. My friend was about 194 centimeters tall, and he came nowhere near close to the height of this thing, further proving to myself that I had not dreamt it at all. Sadly, I have no picture of my friend standing in the same spot. I didn't think of it at the time, and after that, I brought this case to the attention of my superiors and other friends, and they were all as confused as I was. No one seemed to be able to explain what I had seen. Someone suggested that it could be a prank pulled by the other troops. I thought about it, but refused the possibility. There was no way some guys would bother walking many kilometers into the dead of night just to scare some random guardsmen. Besides, even if they did, why would they be standing south of the booth, where it was forbidden for anyone to enter? If I wanted to scare the guardsmen, I would go to the north side of the booth, where I would be detected eventually for sure. But the fact that confirms that it couldn't have been some random troops playing a prank was the sheer size of it. Even two people standing on top of each other could hardly match the scale of this thing, let alone stay so still. And then there were the footsteps and the howl. To this day I have no idea what I saw and heard that night. Was it some troop playing a prank? Some abnormally huge civilian having a long night walk in the middle of nature? Or something that science cannot explain? Before this event, I've always been a bit of a skeptic when it came to the paranormal. I'd like to believe, but it's hard without any concrete evidence. But now, when I had seen something myself, and even got proof of it, I don't know what to believe anymore. So, the Grok of Wansaka, whatever you may have been, I hope I someday find the truth about you. My family owns a decent-sized horse boarding facility, and when we first had it going, we used to do bed checks as a family. Bed check is just making sure all the lights and fans were off, as well as looking at the horses for injuries, and if they had blankets during the winter. We had just got back from eating out, and it was a moonless night during fall. As we stepped out of the truck, this large, light grey mass stood up and took off looping towards our pastures. It was about the size of a single cab pickup truck. It made no noise other than hitting the ground as it ran. The only other proof that it was real to us was the horses that were turned out that night screamed and stamped across the pasture it had jumped into. We did a double count of all the horses that night, and not a single one was missing. I still have yet to see it again, and I hope I never do, or at least that there is some explanation for it. I used to have this recurring nightmare about this lizard man type monster, who could see what I could see out of my eyes. So I'd run and hide, and he wouldn't know where I was. But then as soon as I peeked to see if I was safe, he would know. So I'd have to leave that spot and go find somewhere else, and it would happen over and over again. A literal nightmare. But here is the real spooky part. I once mentioned the lizard man to my dad, and he got super white in the face, and his voice was all shaky and just said, "This dream took place at our house in East St. Paul, The one with the apartments right behind it. And I said, "Yeah, that's where I'd always go and hide. How did you know?" And he said, "Because I have the exact same dream." And I don't know if it was just the way he said it, or just the overall situation of both, but I still get goosebumps thinking about it. It's quite chilling. I've never shared this story with anyone, besides the people that were with me that night, and my best friend that claims to have seen him at a different date that I didn't know about until I described my experience to him. I lived in a small town called Bastrop in Louisiana, with my cousin and his wife. There's not much to do in Morehouse Parish besides drive back roads, like we've done thousands of times before. Then one night, in 2015, we were leaving a church that we used to clean at around 2 a.m. or so. We were in my cousin's 1990 GMC Sierra single cab 4x4. We decided to ride back roads. So as we're cruising, we're talking and listening to Nirvana. But anyway, his wife was asleep in the middle seat when we turned onto a paved road, 5 miles or so outside of town, and come around a curb, and there it was, something we'd never seen before. I am an avid hunter, and had been in the woods all hours of the day and night. I was also in the army, but had never been more freaked out by something than what I had witnessed. There was something dead in the road, and something was eating it when the headlights hit it. It looked up, and was about 2.5 to 3 feet tall, like it was kneeling over whatever it was eating. It had red eyes, and stood up so fast it seemed like a millisecond. It was about 7 to 8 feet tall, pitch black, and its skin looked like a bat skin, but was darker, and in one fell swoop, it leapt, and its wings opened up and flew into the woods on the side of the road that it had been moving over at 50 miles an hour. It was the wildest experience of my life, and I've always been cynical when it comes to the paranormal, but I know what I saw that night, and so does my cousin.
This happened when I was a small child, probably around 4, after I had experienced what I now know as a near-death experience. I was with my grandmother, who was very healthy for her age. We went trekking across our property with a picnic basket in tow, just looking to sit down with our dog and have a nice time. Normal grandparent stuff. We ended up crossing the creek. It was dry at the time, to go to the back pasture. Nearby, probably around 50 yards away, was our cedar tree. We had sat down and started eating when our dog started acting crazy. This dog, bless her soul, was an angel. She did not act like a dog most of the time. She never barked, never jumped, and always acted polite. However, at this very moment, she went nuts, running in circles around us, growling and barking. My grandmother got concerned, so she put our picnic stuff back in the basket and tried to calm her down. I was sitting a few feet away, scared because my dog was growling and having no idea as to why. I will admit my memory gets fuzzy around here, but I vividly remember seeing a large, grey creature step out of the creek tree line that we had previously walked through. Upon seeing this too, my grandmother scooped me up as quickly as she could and ran out of there, our dog running behind us. I am 90% sure she ran to the cedar tree. She always talks about it being her favourite tree and how protective it is. The tree was a lot closer than our house that was roughly half a mile away at this point. I just know our dog calmed down and I was happier. I still have no clue as to what that could have been.
This happened to a friend and I a few years ago. My friend and I are both gun enthusiasts, and I had just purchased a new gun and wanted to shoot it. I live at the base of a mountain that borders the Blue Ridge Parkway. I own 17 acres, so shooting in my backyard isn't an issue. We began shooting my new gun, and my friend turns to his right and is immediately shocked and says, "Hey man, what's that?" When I turned to look, I saw something that sticks with me to this day. It was a red-eyed creature, maybe 2 feet high with glowing red eyes. I did not get a good vibe from it, and its face was terrifying. Even with a loaded gun in my hand, we approached the creature slowly, and my feeling of terror rose. My friend and I immediately turned around and went inside, and did not speak of it for the rest of the time, like we had forgotten about what happened. My friend called me the next day and asked me why we had not done anything, and both came to an agreement that this creature had influenced us in some way. If anyone has had any similar experience, please share it. Looks-wise, it was about 2 to 3 feet tall, scaly grey skin, but I was distracted by the eyes. They penetrated through me and were so intense. It must have been 20 years ago, when my brother-in-law saw what we can only describe as a lizard or reptile man. This happened in the mountain towns of Xochimilco, Mexico City. I remember it was the time when he was still dating my sister, and one night after hanging out with her at our place, he went back home. I recall it was a few minutes past 11, and he used to drive a Volkswagen Beetle, and that night he headed uphill for San Francisco where he lived. He had to take a road surrounded by trees, pine trees. To his left side was the hill, and he told us that when he got around the curve he reached a dark, rocky place. The rocks were huge and it was pitch black. He was driving very fast, as he was used to, and so he turned on his high beam headlights. After doing it, he could see some movement from the corner of his eye, and within a few seconds, right in front of him, he saw a huge creature crossing the road in just 2 steps, which immediately reached the other side of the road, where a tall wall made out of stone was built. He couldn't say if the creature went through the wall, jumped over it, or went down some kind of ditch, but the animal disappeared. He only remembers that it was pretty tall with a humanoid form, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, but had a tail. He said that if it had been someone in a costume, he would have dragged his tail, but he recalls that it never touched the ground. Instead of a mouth, it had a turtle-like beak, and since he had his high beams on, he could see it very clearly, and described the skin as greyish. I used to make fun of him for saying he'd been smoking too much weed or something, but later on, we found out that other people living nearby had also seen it. That was just about the time when 2 of my dogs went missing. One day one of them got lost while we were walking in those woods. He was walking ahead of me, and went out of sight while running downhill. I heard him whimper once, and never saw him again. When I heard it, I ran to the place I thought he had gone to, but I couldn't find him. There were houses down the hill where some dogs lived, but I never heard them bark or anything had passed by. I looked for him everywhere on several occasions. He wasn't hit by a car, and I have no clue what happened to that dog. Those were the times when we had no idea why the army used to go up into the mountains very frequently, and wouldn't let anyone else in. They were supposedly training, and a lot of soldiers camped there, and every week, new soldiers would arrive to replace the ones from the past week. We thought it was a strange coincidence, and so that's what happened. A lot of people have claimed to seeing this creature, although I never saw it. Nonetheless, whenever I went into the hills, I had this strange and weird feeling of being watched. My mum hates camping, so my dad always took me and my two sisters for a few days camping in the woods. It's a tradition that his father passed down to him, and he wanted us girls to carry it on too. We always went to the same woods, but there's something that happened that made us stop going. One summer, we were walking through the woods. We had deviated off the path to find somewhere a bit more private, as every year we tried to go somewhere we hadn't been before. We had been walking on the path for maybe half an hour, and it was still very bright with the sun high in the sky. That's when we heard something, rustling. At first we sort of dismissed it, but then the rustling grew loud very quickly. All four of us turned around, and this huge bipedal creature that must have been about 10 foot tall, I don't know, it was just running really fast, runs straight towards us. No reaction time, just pure fear. I felt like I was going to die, going to be trampled by whatever this thing was. This creature ran straight past us, and I swear I could smell it and feel the hair brush past me as it made its way across the forest. I followed it with my eyes, but within an instant, it was gone again. My father said nothing. We turned around and got our little butts back home. We didn't talk about it much. My father has never taken us to the woods again, and I don't blame him. Okay, so my first story is actually my friend's story. During the time these things took place, we were all high school students. This is all happening in Florida, by the way. I already knew about skinwalkers and the like, but when these things happened to me, I wasn't sure if it really was a skinwalker or something else. I've noticed that most of the people who tell me they've experienced the same phenomenon live in the area that I do, and my friend is no exception. My friend is called Jay, and lives about 10 minutes away from me. She told me that in her bus, there's this one area they drive by to drop this kid off. She said she doesn't know why, but it gives her the creeps. Well, she told me that one early morning, so it was still dark outside, when they were driving in that area to pick him up, all the kids in the bus and the driver saw this weird-ass deer running along the bus. It didn't run away from the bus, but ran beside it. She said it looked weird as hell. You all know the usual stuff, it looking like some humanoid deer because it just didn't look right. Like its limbs were bent in an awkward way, and she said its eyes were freaky. The thing is, my friend didn't know jack about skinwalkers or any of that mumbo jumbo, so I basically got the chills. I tried being reasonable, because I thought that perhaps she'd just seen a regular deer, and since it was dark, there was a possibility that she got confused. Besides, it's Florida. I don't think we're even supposed to get that kind of stuff down here. However, Jay swore up and down that it wasn't like a normal deer. She said that they all saw it, and the bus driver even slowed down to get a better look, because everyone was weirded out by it, and it was basically pandemonium. After a while, it ran off and disappeared. Jay couldn't have made something like this up, because like I said before, she doesn't even know anything about skinwalkers or the goat man or whatever it could be. So anyway, I got freaked out here because I am knowing about these things, and my friend is clueless, thinking she's just telling a regular story about some freaky deer demon. So I asked her, "Do you know what skinwalkers are?" And she looked at me and said, "What is that?" I googled them and showed her the description, And she goes, "Yeah, that's what I saw, except it had the head of a deer." She kept on saying it didn't look like an animal or a human, that after a while the kid from that bus stop didn't come back, although that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with this, unless you want to go wild with what might have happened to him. So we were freaking out together, because what she said reminded me a lot about what I heard one night, about it not being animal or human. See, a couple of years before she told me this story, I found myself one night in the backyard, like really early, perhaps 3 in the morning or so, because I was thinking about things due to personal reasons. I was just kind of chilling and enjoying the silence, when all of a sudden, I hear this really freaky ass echoing scream from really far away. The only way I can describe it is as if a woman and a cat were trapped together inside of a bag and screaming like they were about to get murdered. I know mountain lions, foxes and owls can make the weirdest mating call sounds, and I've looked this stuff up, trying to debunk it myself, but it just didn't sound anything like those things. You usually would be able to tell if it's an animal, right? It's just common sense. Like my friend said before, that didn't sound animal or human. It sounded unnatural and weird. Now, me being me, I was pretty unfazed at first. A little concerned, yeah. But at first it was really too far away, and I just assumed it was a woman, and I actually thought that they were killing people in the streets at 3 in the morning. The thing is, that thing travelled fast. It was freaky as hell, and the closer it got, the more weird and unnatural it sounded. It only took me a couple of seconds to realise that this was no woman and that it was no cat, because while this was going down, I was going through in my head, what the hell is that? This thing went from sounding like it was a couple of miles away to being in my damn neighbourhood in under 5 seconds. It was weird, because 1 second it was so far and the next it was right on my street. I almost soiled myself. The second I stood up to leave, the scream had just stopped. Like it just dead-ass stopped. And I'm really thinking at this point it's in front of my house. So I walked as calmly as possible back inside, locked the doors, and the scream was back to being far away again. Weird as hell. I've also heard scraping and tapping on my windows some nights, usually around the same time. I'd say 2 to 4 o'clock in the morning, and I've seen dark figures that weren't affected by light outside of my house. To add detail to these things so that you can get a feel for it. Basically, what happened is that I was doing a project for class, and since I procrastinate like a pro, I'm up till 2 AM. I go to wash my hands from all the graphite, and as the water is running, I hear scraping against one of the bathroom doors that leads to the backyard. Now, most of the door is made up of these glass panels that kind of make everything look like a bunch of blurry gloops if you try and look out of it, and for a split second, I thought I noticed something pointy and ash grey scraping against the window. It almost looked ghost-like. I turned off the water and waited a little bit, and it comes back to scraping against the window again. I'm trying not to freak out, but my hands are shaking. It's stupid, but I actually whispered, "What are you doing?" while my voice trembled. It stopped, and I didn't hear anything except what sounded like someone walking by the window in my room every now and then. It continued that way for some nights too. Off and on, I would hear footsteps by my window, and even a tap or two some nights as well. Sometimes I just ignored them, and other times I look out to see if someone was there, but there never was anyone. Another night, I had been outside in my backyard again, after having a rough day. It was maybe 3 or so in the morning, and I'm sitting outside on the trampoline just relaxing. I suddenly notice it's like absolutely quiet, like the kind of uneasy silence that almost feels like a vacuum. I get this kind of dread like I'm being watched, and I snap my head to my left and catch a glimpse of a humanoid, dark figure ducking under the other side of my fence immediately. I'm a little freaked out because I noticed this thing was pure black. Like the streetlight nearby didn't hit it at all. Almost like it looked cartoony, if that makes sense. Because it was like the law of physics didn't need to apply for this thing. See, the reason I'm ranting about this stuff is because I told both of my friends at my own story in my psychology class at the same school. A lot of these kids live around my area. I mean about 5 to 15 minutes away max. And they all started screaming at the entire class, and they all went crazy when I finished, because apparently they've all experienced similar things. One girl told me that she also heard tapping on her window at night and heard screaming. It freaked me out because she explained it in the same way I did. She said it sounded like a woman or a cat, but not really like either. Another one of my friends who lives really close told me she saw dark figures in the woods and heard the screaming too. Pretty much everyone has heard the screaming. It sounded the same. That's the thing. In completely different time frames. That's what's weird, because everyone's voice sounds different. So how could she be describing the same thing I did? You all know, like if people were really killing each other out there. None of us thought it was an animal either. We all agreed from that point on that our town was haunted as hell. But I don't know. I mean, if there are any animals out there that sound like that, I want to know. Because that didn't sound like anything I'd heard before, so I want to be enlightened. The only person I've ever heard who's seen anything remotely specific is the first friend from Art, who went on the bus, and apparently it's like really bad to talk about skinwalkers, and even worse if you see them. It's like bad mojo. Those things are said to be able to travel very quickly. So thinking about that made it seem like what we experienced was a skinwalker. But to be honest, I hope there's a logical explanation that I'm not aware of. Today, I asked my co-worker, who was also a friend in high school and lives nearby too. He got all spooked and said that he's seen and heard the same things. He's very spiritual and often has visions. He told me that he believes they're doing dark magic in the woods because of a dream that he had about some hooded figures sacrificing a woman and a cat, or something like that. Which is freaky, because it also turns out that behind our local park, there's a patch of woods which is very shifty. I was shown this by an acquaintance during my freshman year who lives a couple of streets away. Down the path in the woods after some walking, there's this huge cross smack dab in the middle of the woods. It's basically raw, crooked, nailed together into a cross, with rope hanging from where you put your hands if you were getting crucified. It's huge too, and whenever I decide to check it out, I always feel uneasy. Like this feeling that if I stay for too long, something bad will happen. It doesn't look like a grave, to be honest, but who knows. Anyway, he says I'm not the first person that he knows who's told him about experiencing these things. He also had his own experiences with humanoid figures. He says he once saw one, and that it turned and looked at him directly in the eye, as if it immediately knew he was looking at it. So basically, we no longer mess around in the woods.
My friend and I were driving around the back roads of Ballard County in western Kentucky. It was around 2 a.m. I was driving and turned onto a gravel farm road. As I did, I caught sight of something white and vaguely human-shaped crawling in the ditch. As we passed it, I hit the brakes thinking it was a person who needed help. "Are you crazy? Don't stop," my friend Blake screamed. I looked in the mirror and saw that it was standing up. Even though it was still in the ditch, it was as tall as the stop sign next to it. It took a step towards us, and I just hit the gas. As we drove away, I saw in the mirror that it dropped onto all fours and was crawling after us. I didn't start pulling away from it until I got up to about 40 miles per hour. No matter how close I was to it, I never got a good look at it. It was fuzzy, like it was constantly out of focus. I'm not sure why, but something about it makes me think of it as male. Maybe the height. When it crawled, it looked like it had lizard hands and feet flat on the ground, elbows and knees up and out, body wiggling side to side. This happened to me when I was around 22. I'm 40 now, and have never seen that thing again. I've taken many a midnight cruise along those narrow roads, but I've never had the nerve to go near that particular farm road again.
About 10 years ago, me and my husband were going spelunking in a remote part of Canada, although I don't want to mention where for privacy's sake. We were using flashlights and descending into the darkness. We had been to this cave before, but we were trying to reach a chamber that we had yet to have got to on previous occasions. As we're making our way down, we hit the ground and start making our way towards where this chamber is. That's when we hear something in the cave. There really shouldn't be anything about, other than a few bats, as we're very deep down, and there shouldn't be any rodents here, not any that could have survived the fall anyway. We try and ignore it, assuming it's still wildlife, and that's when we see something from our headlamps. A creature, tall, humanoid, grey, just running through the cave. We stand there in shock, and without even saying a word, we run back and haul us out of there as quickly as possible. We never returned to that cave. We told our friends about it, and they said that it could have very well been a hoax. But who the hell would have dressed in grey, stayed in the pitch black, just to wait for the opportune time to scare two cavers? It doesn't make any sense to me. I live 25 minutes south of Boston. About 6 months ago, I saw this insane thing. It was about 3 a.m. I had been up late, as I normally am. I stepped outside to smoke a cigarette. It was dark as hell, except for the stars and full moon. As I was smoking, I heard this noise of something flying. I look up and see this winged creature land on my neighbor's roof and just sit there like a gargoyle would. I thought I was seeing stuff or seeing something wrong, but then the creature jumped up and flew away, and I could see its whole body. It was the size of a small human, but massive wings. It reminded me of a gargoyle. I don't know what the hell it was, but it was crazy. If anyone has ever seen anything like this, I'd love to hear your story. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I do hope that you enjoyed tonight's stories. And of course, a huge thank you to the Paranormal Scholar for helping me and joining on the video. As I said at the start, this is indeed a two-part collaboration, and you can find more amazing stories over on the Paranormal Scholars channel. It would mean a lot to me if you would go over there and listen to it. You will certainly enjoy it, and it will be worth your time. And while you're there, please let them know that Mort sent you. It's always nice. So, I'll see you there. Link on screen now.